It all started quietly, like the faint rustle of leaves before a storm. The stories trickled in like rain, barely noticeable at first. Whispers of strange sounds near the church, fleeting shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of one's vision, and an eerie feeling of being watched. Our town had its share of gossip, and most people, myself included, dismissed these tales as overactive imaginations. But soon, the rumors grew harder to ignore. People began speaking in hushed tones about hissing noises during late night service and unsettling changes in Pastor Obina's demeanor. I tried to brush it off until the day I sat in the church pew, listening to one of his sermons. Pastor Obina, the man who once radiated warmth and compassion, seemed different. His words cut sharper, heavier than usual, as though they were meant to instill fear rather than hope. His eyes, once kind and full of life, seemed to pierce through me, cold and unfeeling. A chill ran down my spine. That day marked the beginning of a nightmare, one that would shake the very foundation of our town. Pastor Obina wasn't always like this. When he arrived in our small town 5 years ago, he was a beacon of hope. He came with little more than a Bible in hand and a fire in his heart, determined to bring change to a struggling community. His church, Holy Fire Ministries, started a modest gathering of a few families in a rundown building, but his charisma was undeniable. People were drawn to him, not just for his powerful sermons, but for the way he made everyone feel seen and valued. In those early days, he worked tirelessly. He organized food drives, built homes for the homeless, and established scholarships for underprivileged students. His efforts were so impactful that people from nearby towns began attending his services, drawn by the stories of his kindness. It wasn't long before Holy Fire Ministries outgrew its humble beginnings. A new church was built, a grand structure with gleaming white walls and tall stained glass windows. The community celebrated the church as a symbol of their shared triumph. For a time, it felt like we were living in a dream. As the church grew, so did Pastor Obina's reputation. His sermons were broadcast on radio stations, and his face appeared in newspapers. He became a local celebrity, a man whose influence extended far beyond our town. But with fame came change. It started subtly. His sermons became more theoretical, his promises more extravagant. He began to speak of miracles, healings, and visions, and people hung on his every word. The pastor who once walked among us, humble and approachable, now seemed untouchable, larger than life. And then there were the rumors. At first, they were nothing more than murmurs. People questioning his motives, wondering if his charity work was more about power than compassion. But soon, darker stories began to circulate. Some said Pastor Obina cursed those who opposed him. A local shopkeeper claimed her business failed after she refused to donate to the church. Another man fell mysteriously ill after speaking against him. I didn't want to believe it, but doubt crept in, especially after what I witnessed one Sunday morning. The service that day was packed. with people spilling out into the aisles. A mother approached the altar, carrying her frail, sickly child. She begged Pastor Obinna to pray for her daughter's healing. He placed his hand on the child's head, and the congregation fell silent, watching with bated breath. The child's eyes suddenly widened, and she began to tremble. Her gaze wasn't on the pastor, but behind him. She pointed a shaky finger over his shoulder, her lips quivering as she whispered, "It's watching." A murmur swept through the crowd, and the pastor quickly ended the prayer, brushing off her reaction as she feared of the crowd. But I couldn't shake the look in her eyes, wide with terror, as though she had seen something none of us could. Despite the whispers, Holy Fire Mountain continued to grow. People came from far and wide, leaving their own congregation to join Pastor Obinna's church. It was as if a spell had been cast over the region. The church expanded its reach, opening new branches in neighboring towns. Pastor Obinna's face was everywhere, on billboards, flyers, and television ads. But the success felt hollow. Those of us who had been with the church from the beginning couldn't ignore the growing unease. The once welcoming atmosphere of the church had turned oppressive. The air felt heavy, and the warmth we once associated with the place was gone. And then the hissing began. People claimed to hear it during late night services, a faint but unmistakable sound like a snake slithering through the sanctuary. Some said it came from beneath the altar. Others swore they saw shadows moving where there shouldn't have been any. I didn't know what to believe until the night I saw it myself. I was walking home late one evening, passing by the church. The windows were dark, but as I glanced towards the altar, I saw them, two glowing, slitted eyes staring back at me. My heart froze. I blinked, and they were gone. A small group of us decided to investigate. We couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Late one night, we gathered with flashlights and slipped into the church. What we found beneath the sanctuary still haunts me. In the hidden chamber, the walls were marked with strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. The floor was scorched with patterns that looked like scales, and a stone altar stood at the center, covered in objects that made my stomach turn. Candles, bones, and what appeared to be dried blood. It was clear Pastor Obinna had made a pact with something ancient and evil. The confrontation happened one night when the heavens seemed to rage with us. The lightning cracked across the sky, and the thunder shook the earth as we gathered outside the church, clutching our Bibles in each other's hands. We entered the sanctuary, our voices low but firm as we called out to Pastor Obinna. He stood at the altar, his back to us. When he turned, his eyes glowed golden, silted like the eyes of a serpent. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice laden with something inhuman. The ground beneath us began to tremble. From the shadows emerged the snake, massive, black as night, its scales shimmering like grass. its golden eyes burned with rage as it called protectively around the pastor. "Leave now," Pastor Obinna commanded, but we stood firm. The snake struck first. Its jaws snapped inches from our faces. But as we prayed, a barrier seemed to form around us, protecting us from its attack. Our voices grew louder, filled with desperation and faith. The snake hissed and screeched, its movements growing more frantic as it struggled against the power of our prayers. Pastor Obinna fell to his knees, clutching his head. He began to weep, the glowing in his eyes fading as the bond between him and the creature weakened. Finally, with one last anguish hiss, the snake dissolved into smoke, vanishing into the air. The storm outside ceased, and a strange calm settled over the church. Pastor Obinna lay on the ground, trembling and broken. He confessed everything, how he had been lured by the promises of power and wealth, how the snake had offered him everything he ever wanted in exchange for his loyalty. "I thought I could control it," he sobbed. "I didn't know it would take everything." Though the creature was gone, its mark remained. He scorched patterns on the floor where a grim reminder of what had happened. In the days that followed, the church was cleansed, the hidden chamber was sealed, and symbols of hope, doves, olive branches, and crosses replaced the shadows. The community came together, stronger and more united than ever. Holy Fire Ministries became a place of healing again, a beacon of light in a town that had seen so much darkness. But even now, as I walk past the church, I sometimes feel it, a faint, lingering hiss, carried on the wind, a whisper of what was.